In the Caribbean's deep colonial shadow in 1943, in the town of Moruga on the southern coast of Trinidad, Leighton Rhett Radford Howe was born. He would later be known to Britain and far beyond as Darcus Howe, writer, broadcaster, organizer, and a figure whose voice carried the defiant cadence of the Black Power generation. Raised in a politically aware household, his father a school principal, his mother a teacher and activist, Howe grew up in an island still under British rule. The rhythms of calypso and the debates of anti-colonial politics shaped his youth. In the early 1960s, he moved to London to study law, arriving in a metropolis that promised opportunity but delivered, for many Caribbean migrants, cold rooms, closed doors, and the open sting of racial prejudice. In Britain, the tide of West Indian migration after the Empire Windrush had brought tens of thousands to the so-called mother country, but the welcome was often hostile. Police sus laws targeted young black men, landlords posted "no coloureds" signs, and violence flared in streets from Notting Hill to Birmingham. Howe, still in his 20s, gravitated to the ferment of radical politics, joining with figures such as CLR James, his great-uncle and mentor, and engaging with the emerging Black Power movement in Britain. It was in West London, in Notting Hill's Ladbroke Grove, that Howe's path would intersect with a small Caribbean cafe called the Mangrove. Opened in 1968 by Trinidadian Frank Critchlow, the Mangrove quickly became more than a restaurant. It was a community hub, a political salon, a place where the air was thick with the scent of pepper pot and the talk of liberation. The police, seeing it as a threat, raided it repeatedly, a dozen times in its first 2 years. Each raid was justified on paper by vague claims of drugs. Not a single raid found any. By 1970, Howe and other activists had had enough. They organised a march to protest the police harassment of the Mangrove. That demonstration, peaceful in intent, met with heavy police presence, scuffles and arrests. Howe was among 9 men and women charged with inciting a riot. The trial that followed at the Old Bailey in 1971 became known as the case of the Mangrove Nine. Over 55 days it turned into a landmark in British legal history. Howe and others chose to represent themselves, challenging the court's legitimacy and exposing the racism at the heart of the Metropolitan Police. In an extraordinary moment, the jury, majority white in a court system steeped in colonial precedent, acknowledged for the first time in British history that there was evidence of racial hatred in the Metropolitan Police. All 9 were acquitted of the most serious charges. For Howe, it was both a personal vindication and a public turning point, proof that resistance could be mounted in the courtroom as well as the street. In the years that followed, Howe's activism expanded into journalism and broadcasting, not a retreat from politics, but a new front. He edited Race Today, transforming it into a militant literate forum for black radical thought, reporting from the front lines of housing struggles, workplace disputes, and street protests. Under his stewardship, Race Today became both a record and an instrument of Britain's Black Power era, connecting local battles to a global movement stretching from Harlem to Brixton to Johannesburg. By the 1980s and 1990s, Howe had become a familiar presence on British television, a sharp, unflinching interviewer and documentarian. Programs such as The Bangdung File and Devil's Advocate placed him in living rooms across the country, his Trinidadian lilt carrying hard questions about race, justice and the legacy of empire. He refused the role of compliant presenter. He was as likely to confront his own network as his subjects. His documentaries, including Windrush, dissected the lived experience of Britain's black communities with the same clarity and courage he had once brought to the dock at the Old Bailey. Even in later years, Howe remained a provocateur. In 2011, during a live BBC interview about the London riots, he cut through official narratives to speak of alienation, policing, and youth anger, an intervention that drew both fierce criticism and wide respect. He never softened his language to suit respectability. His loyalty was to truth as he saw it, not to power. Darcus Howe died in April 2017, aged 74, in Streatham, South London. Tributes poured in from fellow activists, journalists and ordinary folk who remembered his voice cutting through the noise with unblinking precision. Howe was the young man from Trinidad who crossed the ocean to study law and instead became a barrister for his people in the court of public life. From the Mangrove Nine to the television screen, he fought to make Britain face its own reflection, to confront the evidence of racial injustice etched into its institutions. Howe's weapon was not only protest, but the sharp, patient force of argument. His legacy endures in the archives of radical journalism and in the precedent set by a jury's simple historic admission that racism was real and could be named in a court of law. In that naming, Howe helped carve a space for truth in the record, a space no raid, no statute, no silence could erase.